It had been there for years, invisible to everyone. Hundreds of people passed by, looking away, as if their existence didn't matter. But on a day that seemed like any other, everything changed. LeBron James stopped, watched, and did something no one expected. What he did not only transformed this woman's life, but also impacted thousands of people around the world. What happened at that meeting? How was a simple gesture able to rekindle hope and change a fate that seemed sealed? You won't believe this story. The city was buzzing with its fast pace, cars rushing by, people walking with their eyes fixed on their own destinations, indifferent to what was around them. Among the imposing buildings and busy streets, a solitary figure went unnoticed. An elderly woman with disheveled hair, wearing time-worn clothes, sat in the same corner for years, as if she were part of the city's forgotten landscape. His gaze, once full of life, now seemed lost, reflecting the weight of the stories that no one bothered to listen to. She didn't ask for money or speak words to anyone passing by. She was just there, waiting for something that even she herself didn't know would ever come. On that particular day, the sun was beating down on the city, making the concrete even more scorching. The elderly woman, with her skin marked by time and the elements, seemed even more fragile in the scorching heat. His few belongings, a worn blanket and a bag with pieces of stale bread, were organized next to him. His thin body trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from weakness. Nobody noticed, until a car with dark glass stopped a few meters away. From the vehicle, a tall man got out, dressed simply, but impossible not to be recognized. LeBron James was not just a basketball star, but a symbol of overcoming and generosity. His time was precious, his schedule was full, but something at that moment made him stop. He had passed that street countless times. Perhaps he'd even seen the elderly woman before. But that day, something was different. His eyes met hers, and there was something he couldn't ignore, an untold story, a life that seemed to have been forgotten by the world. At first, she didn't react. People stopped occasionally. Some left coins, others gave looks of pity or disgust, but no one stayed. Nobody really saw it. LeBron not only saw it, he felt it. He bent down to her level and, in a simple gesture, asked her name. The elderly woman blinked in surprise. How long had it been since someone had asked that? Her voice, although weak, responded with a thread of hope that even she didn't know still existed. Her name was Eleanor. His past was a mosaic of broken memories, a life that had once had brightness, but which little by little was fading away. Widowed, childless, with no family nearby, she had lost her home after a succession of misfortunes. First came the illness, then the priceless medical bills, and finally the cruel reality. There was nowhere else to go. From a comfortable life, where she prepared dinners for friends and read books by the fireplace, she was reduced to a piece of sidewalk, a forgotten number in homeless statistics. The words came out slowly, as if each memory carried an unbearable weight. LeBron listened in silence, without rushing, without distraction. For him, it wasn't just another sob story. It was a life that still had value, a story that should not have come to an end. People around started to notice the scene. Some wondered what a sports legend was doing there, sitting on the floor next to an elderly homeless woman. Others pulled out cell phones, recorded, and whispered among themselves. But for Eleanor and LeBron at that moment, the world around them had disappeared. He wasn't there for the cameras, nor for a superficial charitable gesture. He wanted to do something real. The sun began to set, casting long shadows on the street. The traffic continued, the city continued its relentless routine, but something had changed in that small corner of the sidewalk. He knew that simply leaving money there wouldn't solve it. Eleanor needed more than handouts. She needed dignity, a second chance. It was then that he picked up the phone and made a call. A few minutes later, a team from his foundation was already on the way. Eleanor looked at him, not knowing if she should believe him. How many times had they promised help that never came? But there was something different in LeBron's eyes. It wasn't just pity, it was commitment. When the team arrived, bringing water, clean clothes, and a plan, she felt for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. Night fell, and LeBron remained there until he was sure Eleanor was safe. For him, this was just one action among many that he would still do. For her, it was the first step towards recovering something she thought was lost: hope. What would happen from then on would not only change that woman's life, but would touch thousands of people around the world. Stories like this happen every day, but few are told. Here, every detail matters, every twist makes a difference. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories that move, inspire, and prove that a single gesture can change everything. What happens next will surprise you and show you the true power of empathy. So keep watching, because this story is far from over. The van that would take Eleanor to a temporary shelter was on its way, but the elderly woman was hesitant. After so many years living on the streets, trusting someone again was a challenge. He looked at LeBron, trying to find some clue that this wasn't just another empty promise. He, noticing your hesitation, bent down beside you and held your hand firmly. "You don't have to face this alone," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she hadn't heard in years. Still, accepting help meant facing everything I had tried to forget: the fear of disappointment, rejection, and above all, of being forgotten again. The car arrived, and Eleanor took one last look at the sidewalk where she had spent so many nights. With a deep sigh, he got into the van, holding the bag with his few belongings as if they were his last link to the past. Along the way, his mind swirled with doubts and insecurities. What if all this was temporary? What if, after a few weeks, he became invisible to the world again? LeBron, sitting next to him, saw the anguish written on his face. He knew that changing someone's life wasn't just about offering a roof over their heads, but rebuilding the trust destroyed by time. Arriving at the shelter, Eleanor was greeted by social workers, doctors, and volunteers. The environment was different from what I imagined. Clean, organized, with people genuinely willing to help. However, his heart still carried an invisible barrier. During the first nights, he slept with difficulty, finding the silence of the room strange after years of hearing the constant noise of the streets. Accepting hot meals seemed like an unattainable luxury, and the soft bed, something far from reality. With each interaction, his mind told him not to get attached, because none of it would last. The days passed, and challenges soon appeared. The biggest one was not the new environment, but the internal wounds he carried with him. Facing your story meant reliving losses you tried to bury. The first psychological treatments were difficult. Talking about his past was opening up scars that still hurt. There were moments when he thought about giving up, about returning to the streets, where at least he knew what to expect. But something made her stay. The memory of LeBron's look, full of respect and certainty that she deserved that new chance. While Eleanor faced her own internal conflicts, LeBron worked behind the scenes. Her foundation didn't just want to provide temporary shelter, but to ensure she had a dignified future. In meetings with his team, he insisted that this was not just another charitable action, but a commitment to the life of someone who had been forgotten. The bureaucratic difficulties in obtaining permanent housing, ongoing medical care, and emotional support were numerous, but retreating was not an option. News of LeBron and Eleanor's meeting spread quickly. The media began to tell her story, and social media was buzzing with messages of support. But along with the attention came questions. Some people were critical, saying that helping just one person wouldn't solve the bigger problem of homelessness. Others suggested that it could just be a marketing ploy. Eleanor, seeing some of these headlines, felt the weight of the exposure. The fear of being treated as a passing symbol tormented her. What if, in the end, this is all just a show? Doubt gnawed at her, and the feeling of being used once again made her close in even more. LeBron, upon realizing his anguish, decided to act. Instead of grandiose speeches or media interviews, he did what few would do. He sat next to her, away from the cameras, and just listened. He knew that More than any material help, she needed someone who wouldn't give up on her, even when her own mind told her nothing would change. "I don't do this for fame. I do it because I believe that every person has value," he said, looking straight into her eyes. For the first time, Eleanor felt that someone not only wanted to help her, but actually saw her as a complete human being, with history, pain, and dreams. The following days were a roller coaster of emotions. Some advances were followed by relapses. The first trip to the hospital for a checkup was a difficult time. The diagnosis of severe malnutrition and other health problems resulting from years on the streets showed how cruel time had been to his body. But at the same time, the treatment brought a new perspective. She still had time. She still had a chance to rebuild her life. Small gestures started to make a difference. The first genuine smiles appeared, and with each full meal, each night of fearless sleep, Eleanor took a step away from the past that imprisoned her. Meanwhile, LeBron and his team worked to ensure the aid was lasting. Finding a permanent home was not simple. The bureaucratic processes took time, the costs were high, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. For him, this was not just an act of generosity, but a matter of justice. Eleanor had been forgotten for too long. The biggest test came when a journalist tried to interview Eleanor without her permission, treating her as a symbol rather than a person. It reignited her fear of being used and made her consider abandoning everything. But before he made any hasty decisions, LeBron appeared. This time, he didn't try to convince her with words, he just showed actions. He made his team available to protect her from unwanted exposure, reinforced her commitment, and above all, ensured that she would have complete control over her own story. It was at that moment that Eleanor realized that, for the first time in a long time, she had a choice, and she chose to continue. The battle was not yet won. The challenges were still many, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer just a shadow on the streets. Now she was someone fighting for her own redemption, supported by people who truly cared. What came next would not only define his future, but also inspire thousands of people to see the invisibles around them. Eleanor stood in front of the door of her possible new home, but she hesitated. The process up to that point had been long, full of emotional and bureaucratic challenges. But now, when the change was about to happen, fear was once again dominating her. Years of living on the streets created a barrier that was difficult to break. She had already lost everything once. What if this happened again? The weight of her doubts almost made her step back until a familiar voice echoed behind her. LeBron James, watching her closely, noticed her hesitation and decided to act. He didn't try to convince her with empty words. Instead, he told his own story. As a boy from Akron, raised by a single mother who often didn't know if he had a place to sleep, he knew the fear of uncertainty. He knew what it was like to doubt your own future. But he learned something he never forgot. No one wins alone. Eleanor listened intently, absorbing every word. For the first time, someone who seemed unreachable appeared human, close, equal to her in many aspects. The connection between the two grew stronger every moment. While Eleanor struggled with her own fears, another unexpected element changed the course of events. A young social worker named Olivia, who had been following the case from the beginning, brought a letter. It was from an unknown woman who had seen Eleanor's story in the media and wanted to share something surprising. Upon reading the first few lines, Eleanor's eyes widened. The name was familiar. With shaking hands, he continued reading. The woman said she was the niece of a great friend Eleanor had in the past, before she lost everything. For years, this friend searched for her, without success, fearing the worst. Knowing that Eleanor was alive and about to start over had moved her deeply. Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. For so long, she believed she was completely alone, but here was proof that someone never gave up on finding her. His heart raced. Life, which seemed to have closed, suddenly showed new paths. Olivia, sensing his emotion, gently held his hand. "You have never been forgotten, Eleanor. Your story is still being written." The impact of those words was immense. For so long she saw herself as a ghost of the city, but now she understood that she was still part of the world. With a deep breath, he gathered his courage and walked through the door. The small apartment was simple but cozy. A soft sofa, a tidy table, curtains that swayed slightly in the wind. Nothing luxurious, but it all seemed unbelievable to someone who was used to sleeping in the cold of concrete. She ran her fingers along the kitchen counter, smelled the new wood in the closet, and seeing a made bed with clean sheets, felt the tears welling up. It wasn't just a physical space, it was a fresh start. LeBron watched everything in silence, respecting that moment. He knew he hadn't just changed Eleanor's life. Something inside him had also changed. Basketball has always given him purpose, but seeing the direct impact of his actions off the court brought new meaning to his journey. Inspired by what he experienced alongside Eleanor, he decided to expand his foundation, creating a special program to support people experiencing homelessness. It would not just be a donation, but an ongoing commitment to provide housing, education, and real opportunities. As emotions took over the environment, the apartment door opened softly. Olivia entered accompanied by an older woman with anxious eyes and restless hands. Eleanor turned slowly, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. It was her, the friend you thought you'd never see again. For seconds, neither of them could say anything until the other woman whispered, "You're here. I never stopped looking." Eleanor felt her chest tighten, her eyes water, and without hesitation, she took a step forward, involving her friend in a tight hug, filled with years of longing and hope. That moment sealed everything. Eleanor wasn't just changing addresses. She was reclaiming her identity, recovering ties, rescuing the part of herself that she believed had disappeared. When he released the hug, he looked at LeBron, who was smiling, moved. "You gave me back more than a home. You gave me my story back." The words echoed in the hearts of everyone there. What seemed like just a gesture of kindness had become a symbol of transformation. Eleanor knew the journey didn't end there. There would still be challenges, fears to face, difficult days. But now, she had something she hadn't felt in a long time, the certainty that she wasn't alone. She had people by her side, a place to call her own, and above all, a new chance to live. And this time, she would choose to live intensely. The following days brought a new routine for Eleanor. For the first time in years, she woke up without the need to protect herself from the cold of the streets or the constant fear of being expelled from where she was. The simple act of opening your eyes and seeing a safe roof above you was something that for a long time seemed impossible. The feeling of belonging began to settle in little by little, like a gentle breeze that touches the skin after years of storms. It was still difficult to believe that this was his reality now, but each new day reinforced that yes, it was real. LeBron's visits have not stopped. He made a point of monitoring her adjustment, not just to make sure she was okay, but because he truly cared. On one of these visits, he brought something special, an album of old photos that Eleanor's friend had kept all these years. Her shaking hands flipped through the pages, finding versions of herself that seemed to have been erased by time. There she was, young, smiling, in moments that seemed to belong to another life. The shock was great, but it soon gave way to something stronger, the certainty that his story had not been completely lost. There was still time to rebuild it. The surrounding community also mobilized. Eleanor's story deeply touched many people who had ignored her for so long. Small gestures began to emerge. A flower left at the entrance of her new home, a handwritten letter from someone who passed by her every day and never had the courage to ask her name, invitations to conversations and meetings. The isolation that had accompanied her for years was being dissolved by an unexpected support network. The woman forgotten on the sidewalk was now seen, respected, and more than that, loved. Over time, Eleanor began to give back in ways she never imagined. Inspired by what she experienced, she decided to help others who were in the same situation as she was. He started going to shelters and support centers, talking to people who had lost hope, telling their story and showing that change was possible. His voice, previously silenced, now had strength. She understood the weight of the empty look of someone who had lost everything because that look had once been hers. Now, her mission was to make sure no one felt as alone as she once did. LeBron, seeing his impact, realized this was just the first of many lives he would help transform. His foundation's program has expanded, reaching more people in vulnerable situations, offering not only housing, but emotional support and social reintegration. The gesture that began with a simple stop on a sidewalk became a much larger movement. Eleanor, once an invisible figure, was now a symbol of hope, living proof that no one should be forgotten. The transformation was complete, but not easy. There were daily challenges, difficult memories that still surfaced, fears that sometimes came back. But now she had the tools to face them. He had a home, friends, a purpose. Life, which before seemed like a road without destination, now had a new path. She was no longer just someone who survived. He was someone who lived. That night, sitting on the porch of her house, Eleanor watched the sky, feeling the light breeze touch her face. A thought came to his mind. For years, he believed that his story was already over, that all he had left was to wait for time to pass. But now, she saw clearly. Her story was still being written, and this time, she held the pen. Eleanor's story is proof that no one is truly lost, as long as there is someone willing to see beyond appearances. For years, she was ignored, reduced to a shadow in the city, until an unexpected encounter changed everything. It wasn't just about getting help, but about reclaiming your dignity, your identity, and your purpose. Life doesn't always go the way we expect, but even in the most difficult circumstances, there is still room for new beginnings. LeBron James could have just followed his path like so many other people did before him, but he chose to stop, listen, and act. This simple gesture not only transformed Eleanor's life, but triggered something much bigger. He showed that empathy is not just feeling compassion, but taking actions that make a difference. And it also showed that real change happens when we not only help someone get back on their feet, but ensure that they have the support they need to move forward. What this story teaches us goes beyond the act of charity. It's about seeing others as someone who has value, dreams, and a story that deserves to be continued. How many Eleanors are there around us, just waiting for an opportunity to start over? Small gestures can have immeasurable impacts. A look, a word, an act of kindness can be the difference between hopelessness and a new chance. Eleanor's journey didn't end when she found a home. In fact, it was there that his life began again, because starting over is not just about changing places, but believing that there is still something worth fighting for. Her story is a powerful reminder that no one should be forgotten, that there is always time to rebuild what has been lost, and that when we reach out to someone, we are actually making the world a better place for everyone. Now it's up to you. Write respect in the comments to show that every life has value and deserves a second chance. Stories like Eleanor's happen every day, and here you will always see real narratives that inspire and transform. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next exciting stories that will change the way you see the world. And before you leave, there's one more incredible story waiting for you on the screen. Click now and continue this journey of empathy and overcoming.